You've probably noticed it without knowing what you were looking at. Someone walks back into your life after years away. Someone who, by every reasonable measure, should look exhausted. They went through a divorce. They lost a parent. They left a career that defined them. They spent 2 years in what looked, from the outside, like complete collapse. And somehow, when you see them again, their face is lighter than it was before any of it happened. You can't quite explain what's different. The lines are still there, the years still passed. But something underneath the face has shifted, and the shift is so distinct that people who don't know what happened start asking what they've been doing. New skincare, a different diet, a vacation somewhere quiet. The person usually just smiles and changes the subject because the real answer would sound insane. They didn't get younger. They put something down, and whatever they put down had been aging them in ways no one could see. Carl Jung noticed this pattern in his patients decades before anyone was studying the physical effects of psychological integration. He'd see people arrive at his office looking far older than their chronological age, drawn, tight, carrying a kind of facial tension that no amount of rest seemed to relieve. And then, after months or years of the work he called individuation, something would change. Not cosmetically, structurally. The face would soften in a way that couldn't be reproduced by any treatment. The eyes would clear. The shoulders would drop into a position they hadn't held since childhood. And colleagues who hadn't seen the patient in a while would comment, sometimes uncomfortably, that the person looked years younger than they had any right to look. Jung was careful about how he framed this, because he was a serious scientist working in an era that would have crucified him for anything that sounded mystical. But he came to believe, based on years of watching this pattern repeat, that the human face is essentially a map of psychological labor. Every persona you've maintained, every emotion you've suppressed, every shadow aspect you've spent decades pretending didn't exist, all of it costs energy. Enormous, continuous energy. And that energy has to come from somewhere. So the body draws it from wherever it can, from vitality, from suppleness, from the natural processes that keep a face looking alive. Today I'm going to walk you through what Jung actually discovered about why awakened people look younger than their age, what specifically gets released when someone stops performing, why the face is the single most honest record of psychological labor, and what this reveals about what you've been carrying without knowing you were carrying it. Because if there's someone in your life who has gone through real transformation and looks impossibly well for what they survived, there's a reason. And the reason has nothing to do with luck. To understand any of this, you have to start with something Jung said often and almost no one took seriously at the time. He believed that what we call aging is partially aging in the biological sense. Cells dividing, collagen breaking down, the body wearing out, and partially something else entirely, something psychological that the body expresses physically. He'd watched too many people his own age look 20 years older than he did, and too many people decades older than him look strangely vital, to believe that chronology was the only factor at work. What he came to understand was that the human face holds tension the way a clenched fist holds tension. The fist looks like it's just resting there. But if you've been clenching it for 40 years without realizing you were clenching it, the muscles have shortened, the structure has reshaped itself, and even when you finally relax the fist, it takes time for the hand to remember what open feels like. The face does the same thing. Decades of holding particular expressions, the social smile, the controlled neutrality, the performed competence, the swallowed grief, leave imprints. Not lines exactly, patterns of microtension that the muscles have memorized so thoroughly they hold the shape even when you're alone, even when you're sleeping. This is why, Jung observed, two people of the same age can look so radically different. They've spent the same amount of time alive. Their biological clocks have ticked at roughly similar rates, but one of them has been carrying psychological tension that the other one set down years ago. And the one still carrying it shows the cost in their face, their shoulders, the way they hold their jaw, the slight permanent furrow between their eyebrows that they don't even know is there because it's been there as long as they can remember. The first thing that ages people psychologically, and that Jung saw lift off awakened people in a way that physically changed how they looked, is the maintenance of the persona. He didn't mean personality. He meant the constructed self you've been performing for the world since you figured out, somewhere in childhood, that the real you wasn't acceptable as is. The persona is the version of you that goes to work, that talks to your in-laws, that posts on social media, that explains yourself to your doctor, that navigates rooms full of people who would respond badly to who you actually are underneath. Most people don't realize their persona is a performance because they've been performing it for so long that it feels like just being themselves. But Jung pointed out that there's a way to know whether you're inside your persona or outside of it, and the way is exhaustion. The persona costs energy in a specific way, energy that doesn't return through sleep. You can rest for a weekend and still feel depleted on Monday morning. You can take a vacation and find that the depletion follows you. Because what's exhausting you isn't activity, it's the continuous, microsecond by microsecond work of maintaining a version of yourself that isn't quite real. When someone begins to genuinely individuate, when they stop performing the version of themselves that other people are comfortable with and start letting their actual self come through, the energy that used to go into the performance gets returned to the body. Jung described this almost matter-of-factly. He'd watched it happen too many times to be impressed by it anymore. The patient would come in one day looking different, and he'd realize they'd stopped doing whatever they'd been doing to maintain the false self in his presence. And the energy was redistributing itself. The face was getting it back. You can see this if you know what to look for. Someone who has dropped their persona doesn't smile the way they used to. The smile that used to appear automatically when they walked into a room, the social smile, the polite smile, the smile that signaled they were safe to be around. That smile is mostly gone. What replaces it is something more selective. They still smile, but they smile when they mean it. And because they've stopped producing the constant micro-expressions that maintained their performed self, the muscles around their mouth have loosened. The jaw has dropped slightly. The face has a kind of openness that didn't exist when they were still inside the performance. This openness reads to other people as youth, though they can't name what they're seeing. Children have it because they haven't constructed personas yet. Awakened people have it because they've dismantled theirs. The middle of life is where most people lose it, because the middle of life is when the persona has been running for so long and so successfully that it has reshaped the actual structure of the face. The second thing Jung watched leave the bodies of people undergoing genuine transformation was what he called the weight of the unlived life. He meant the accumulated mass of everything a person wanted to do, wanted to say, wanted to become, and didn't. Every conversation you swallowed instead of having, every boundary you didn't hold, every passion you set aside because someone told you it wasn't realistic, every version of yourself you abandoned in order to be more palatable to people whose approval you needed. This weight doesn't sit in some abstract psychological compartment. It settles into the body. Jung observed it in the shoulders of his patients, in the slight forward curl of their posture, in the way they carried themselves through rooms as if they were walking against an invisible wind. The unlived life makes you tired in a way that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got. It's the fatigue of carrying potential you've decided you're not allowed to use. When someone finally begins living the life that's actually theirs, when they have the conversation they've been avoiding for 15 years, when they walk away from the career that was suffocating them, when they let themselves want what they actually want instead of what they've been told to want, the weight starts coming off. And it doesn't come off the way people imagine. It's not euphoric, it's quieter than that. They just notice gradually that they're walking through their days without the resistance they used to feel, that standing up from a chair takes less effort, that their face in the mirror has a quality of presence it didn't have when they were performing a life they didn't want. Jung made a point that almost no one wanted to hear when he made it. He said the unlived life ages the body more than almost anything else, more than stress, more than grief, more than the genuine difficulties of being alive. Because stress and grief and difficulty are responses to real things. They move through you and eventually settle. But the unlived life never settles. It sits there indefinitely, generating low-grade despair every minute of every day, and the body has to carry that despair the way a person carries a heavy bag they've forgotten they were holding. This is why people who've done major life changes, even painful ones, even ones that looked from the outside like disasters, often emerge looking lighter. They weren't lightened by the change itself. They were lightened by setting down what they'd been carrying, the life they were supposed to be living, the self they were supposed to be performing, the future they were supposed to be wanting. All of it dropped, and the body that had been holding it for decades suddenly didn't have to anymore. There's a third thing Jung saw leave people in the process of becoming whole, and this one is harder to talk about because most people don't know they're carrying it. He called it the swallowed self. Every part of you that you decided was unacceptable and pushed down into the unconscious, where it doesn't disappear, but does become a kind of constant internal pressure. If you grew up being told that anger was bad, you swallowed your anger. If you learned that needing things made you weak, you swallowed your needs. If you figured out that your particular way of seeing the world made the adults around you uncomfortable, you swallowed your perception. And all of these swallowed parts went somewhere. They went into the shadow, which is just Jung's word for the internal storage system where the unacceptable self lives. The shadow doesn't sit quietly. It exerts continuous pressure on the conscious mind, asking to be acknowledged, asking to be integrated, asking to be allowed back into the room. And keeping it suppressed requires the same kind of continuous, exhausting energy as maintaining the persona. You're holding a door closed against something that wants to come through, and the holding is happening every second, including when you're sleeping, including when you think you're relaxed. People who carry massive shadows look a particular way. There's a tension in the face that doesn't relax, a held quality in the body, as if they're constantly bracing against something. They often complain of being tired without being able to identify what's tiring them, and their faces tend to age in a particular pattern, a hardening around the mouth, a watchfulness in the eyes that even sleep doesn't undo, a kind of armored quality that other people register as either intimidating or sad without quite knowing why. When someone does the work of shadow integration, when they let the swallowed parts back in, acknowledge them, learn to live with them as part of who they are rather than enemies to be defeated, the door they've been holding closed can finally be released. And the energy that was going into the holding gets returned to the body. The face softens. The watchfulness fades. The armor that had become their default posture starts to drop. And underneath the armor is a face that looks remarkably like the face they had before they ever learned to hold the door closed in the first place. This is part of what people are seeing when they look at someone who has done real psychological work and find them inexplicably younger. They're seeing a face that has stopped fighting itself, a face that no longer has to hold anything down, a face at rest in a way that most adult faces never get to be. If something in this is hitting close, if you've been sensing that you've been holding something for years and the holding is showing up in your body, in your face, in the slow erosion of vitality that doesn't seem to respond to anything you try, there's a guide we put together that might be useful in exactly this kind of moment. It's called True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's work, designed for the part of the process where you're starting to recognize what you've been carrying, but you're not sure yet how to set it down. The link is below this video. But let's keep going because there's something specific about what changes in the face during this process that almost no one talks about, and it's worth understanding clearly. The eyes are the first thing to shift. Jung wrote about this with a kind of careful precision because he knew it sounded mystical, and he was determined to keep it grounded. He'd noticed that patients undergoing genuine individuation developed a quality in their gaze that hadn't been there before. The eyes became, and this is the closest word, present. They stopped scanning the room for threats. They stopped checking other people's faces for approval. They stopped doing the 1,000 tiny things that anxious, performing eyes do without their owner realizing. When you sit across from someone whose eyes have done this shift, you can feel it before you can name it. There's a stillness in their gaze. They're looking at you, but they're not looking for anything from you. They're not hoping you'll like them. They're not waiting for an opening to redirect the conversation. They're not assessing your response to them in real time. They're just there, with you, in a way that feels almost disorienting because most adult interactions don't include that level of presence anymore. This stillness reads as youth to most observers, even though youth doesn't actually have it. Children have an unfiltered openness, but they don't have stillness. They have a constant, beautiful chaos in their gaze that shifts every few seconds. What awakened adults have is something else, a settled quality, a sense that the person behind the eyes has stopped looking elsewhere for what they need. And this settled quality makes the eyes seem clearer, brighter, more present than the eyes of people who are still searching, still scanning, still performing. The second shift happens around the mouth, and it's the one that gives most awakened people their distinct look. The mouth in adulthood becomes a record of every word you swallowed and every word you said that wasn't quite true. Decades of slight smiles you didn't feel, of careful neutrality you maintained when you wanted to scream, of practiced agreement when you actually disagreed. All of it leaves a pattern in the muscles around the mouth that becomes the default expression of the face at rest. When someone has done the work of becoming honest, when they've started saying what they mean and stopped performing emotions they don't feel, the mouth at rest changes shape. The corners drop into a more neutral position. The slight, permanent tension of the maintained smile dissolves. The mouth becomes capable of stillness in a way it wasn't before, which sounds like a small thing, but reads as a major transformation because we're so used to seeing adult mouths in their performed positions. This is partly why awakened people often photograph differently than they look in person. The camera catches the mouth at rest, and the mouth at rest is no longer doing the work of maintaining the social mask. People who see these photographs sometimes find them unsettling without being able to explain why. The face is just being a face, not performing one. The third shift, and the one Jung found most significant, happens in something he called the carriage. The way a person holds their entire body in space. People carrying personas, unlived lives, and swallowed shadows tend to develop characteristic postures, slight forward leans, hunched shoulders, jaws held in particular positions, hips tilted in ways that compensate for tension elsewhere in the body. None of this is conscious. The body has just been adapting for decades to the psychological labor it's been performing. When the labor stops, the body slowly remembers what it's supposed to do. The shoulders drop, the spine lengthens, the jaw releases, the hips recenter. None of this happens dramatically. There's no single moment where the body realigns. But over months and sometimes years, the carriage of an awakened person becomes noticeably different from the carriage they had before. They take up space differently. They walk through rooms differently, they sit in chairs differently, and other people register this as youth, even though youth doesn't actually look like this either. Young bodies are coiled with potential energy they don't yet know how to use. Awakened bodies are relaxed into a kind of presence that young bodies haven't earned yet. There's a paradox in all of this that Jung thought was important to name, and I want to name it too because it's where most people get confused. The people who look younger after awakening did not get younger by trying to look younger. In fact, almost none of them spent any time thinking about how they looked. They spent their time becoming honest, integrating their shadows, releasing their personas, walking away from lives that weren't theirs. The change in their faces was a side effect of psychological work, not the goal of cosmetic work. This is why the youthfulness you see in awakened people can't be reproduced by trying to look younger. Every attempt to manage the face from the outside, every injection, every procedure, every careful effort to appear more vital than you feel, adds another layer of performance the face has to maintain. And the performance ages you even as it tries to make you look younger, because performance itself is one of the things that's been aging you all along. The face that looks younger after awakening is the face that has stopped trying to look any particular way at all. It's just being. And being, it turns out, is what people unconsciously read as vitality. Jung had a moment, late in his career, where he tried to explain this to a colleague who didn't understand what he was seeing. The colleague kept pointing to specific physical features, the texture of the skin, the position of certain lines, and Jung kept saying that wasn't where to look. He said something to the effect that the face is a window, and most adults have spent decades pulling the curtains shut. When the curtains open, the face looks different, even though nothing about the structure has actually changed. The light just gets through differently. And what you're seeing when you look at an awakened person isn't youth. It's the curtains being open, the face being inhabited again by the person it was built for. I want to be honest about something now because I don't want to leave you with a sanitized version of this. Awakened people don't look uniformly beautiful or universally young. Some of them look every day of their age and then some. They've been through more than most people will ever go through, and the wear shows. What's different about them isn't an absence of aging. It's a quality of presence in the aging. Their faces have lived, but the living shows up as character rather than collapse, as depth rather than damage, as a kind of weathered openness rather than the closed-down hardness that develops in people who've been holding their psychological doors shut for decades. There's an old photograph of Jung taken in his 80s that captures this perfectly. He looks like an old man, undeniably. The lines are deep, the body is frail, but the face is alive in a way that most faces aren't, even when they're young. Something is awake behind the eyes. Something is present in the slight curve of his mouth. He isn't performing himself for the camera. He's just there, fully there, in a way that's almost startling to look at. And when people who don't know who he is see the photograph, they often comment that he looks younger than the date on the picture suggests. He doesn't. He looks exactly his age. He just isn't carrying what most people his age were carrying. This is what I think you need to understand if there's anyone in your life who has gone through major transformation and looks well in a way that surprises you. They didn't escape aging. They escaped something else. They escaped the additional weight that most people pile on top of aging, the persona that has to be maintained, the unlived life that has to be carried, the shadow that has to be suppressed, the continuous, low-level performance that consumes the energy the face needs to stay alive. And if you're noticing that you don't look this way, if you've been catching glimpses of yourself in mirrors and recognizing that your face holds more tension than you've ever consciously felt, that there's a tightness around your mouth or a hardness around your eyes that doesn't quite seem to belong to you, that's worth paying attention to. Your face has been keeping a record of psychological labor you might not even know you've been performing. And the record will only get more elaborate the longer the performance continues. Jung believed that the body, when given a chance, would tell you exactly what your psyche has been doing. The face would show you which expressions you've been maintaining. The shoulders would show you what you've been carrying. The jaw would show you what you've been refusing to say. The eyes would show you who you've been searching for in every room. None of this is conscious. The body just records and adapts, year after year, until the recording becomes the structure. What awakened people have done, and what is available to anyone willing to do the work, is let the body release the recording. Not through any cosmetic intervention, through the slow, often difficult process of becoming someone the body doesn't have to constantly compensate for, of becoming someone whose face doesn't have to maintain a daily performance, of becoming someone whose shoulders don't have to carry a life that isn't theirs. The face that emerges from this process is sometimes called younger by observers, and that's fine. Let them call it what they want. But it isn't younger exactly. It's emptier. Emptier of what was never supposed to be there in the first place. Emptier of the persona, the swallowed self, the weight of unlived years. And empty, in this particular sense, looks like the most full thing a face can be. Jung said something near the end of his life that I think captures this better than anything I could write. He said that the goal of psychological work isn't to feel better, it's to become more real. And when you become more real, your face stops carrying the cost of being someone you weren't. The vitality returns because there's nothing draining it anymore. The lightness returns because there's nothing weighing it down. And the youth that other people see when they look at you is just the absence of the false self that had been sitting on top of who you actually were the whole time. This is the part where I want to be careful not to make this sound easier than it is. Letting the persona dissolve is one of the hardest things a person can do. Sitting with the unlived life and grieving what you didn't choose is brutal. Integrating the shadow, actually meeting the parts of yourself you spent decades pushing away, can shake the foundations of every relationship you have, every identity you've claimed, every story you've told yourself about who you are. The face that emerges on the other side is lighter, yes, but it's lighter because of what it survived to become. There's no shortcut to this lightness. You can't meditate your way past the integration. You can't journal yourself into authenticity in a weekend. You can't perform awakening into existence. The work is slow, often lonely, and frequently feels like it's making your life worse before it makes anything better. The face doesn't change quickly. The shoulders don't drop overnight. The eyes don't clear in a month. This is years of work, sometimes decades, and the body responds at its own pace to the psychological reorganization happening underneath. But the work is available, and the change is real. Jung saw it enough times in enough people that he stopped doubting it. Something happens to the human face when the human carrying it stops performing. Something opens up in the body when the body is allowed to release the labor it's been doing. The vitality that other people call youth is just the natural state of a person who isn't fighting themselves anymore. And anyone who can tolerate the difficulty of becoming honest has access to it. If you've been recognizing yourself in any of this, if you've been sensing that the face in the mirror has been telling you something you haven't quite wanted to hear, the guide I mentioned earlier might be a useful place to start. True self-discovery walks you through 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's framework, built specifically for people beginning to feel the weight of what they've been carrying and looking for a way to start setting it down. You can find it linked below. There's one more thing I want to leave you with before we close, because I think it's the part that matters most. The youth you see in awakened people isn't decorative. It isn't a reward for good behavior or a prize handed out for completing the work. It's just what a human being looks like when they stop spending all their energy maintaining something that was never really them. It's the default state of a person who is finally just themselves. Everyone has access to this. The face that's lighter, the eyes that are clearer, the body that's settled into its own presence. None of it is reserved for special people. It's just what's underneath the performance, for all of us. And the only thing standing between you and it is the work of letting the performance go. That work is hard. Jung never pretended otherwise, but the face you'll find on the other side of it is the face you were supposed to have all along. The one that's been there underneath the persona since you were a child. The one that's been waiting for you to stop carrying everything you've been carrying so it can finally come back into the light. The people you see who look younger than they should, who carry themselves like they're not at war with anything, who somehow seem more present at 50 than they did at 25. They aren't winning at aging. They've just stopped paying the tax that most people pay continuously for decades without realizing they're paying it. The tax of the false self, the tax of the unlived life, the tax of the swallowed shadow. They've stopped paying it, and the energy is returning to where it always belonged. Your face is already a record. It already shows what you've been doing with your psyche for as long as you've had one. And if there's something in the record that doesn't quite look like the person you want to be, if there's a tightness or a hardness or a watchfulness that you don't remember choosing, that's information worth listening to. Not because you should look any particular way, because the face is telling you something about what you've been carrying. And what you've been carrying might be ready to be set down. The lightness is available. The presence is available. The face at rest, finally inhabited by the person it was built for, is available. The price is the work of becoming honest, and the work is the only thing that has ever changed anyone. If you haven't yet, take a look at True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, built for the slow, careful process of recognizing what you've been carrying and beginning to set it down. The link is right below this video.